Benjamin from Alabama, who says they have problems with the tri-omni God. So, Benjamin, hello.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good. I've been calling y'all for about 2 weeks now, just kind of going over ideas and expressing knowledge and all that good stuff. So I'm doing pretty good. I was calling in today about the tribunal God or the trilogy or whatever you want to call it.
The Trinity.
Because Trinity. Yeah, thanks. I don't believe in the Trinity. I'm Christian, but I just don't believe that Jesus is God. And I had a bit of kind of a revelation today. I went to church, and I told the guy, I said, well, I don't mean to offend anyone, but I don't believe that Jesus is God. I just believe that he's the Son of God, which, I mean, there's not much difference to that, but there is to them. It's a big difference to them, I guess. And they kind of looked at me funny, so I thought I'd bring it up today.
Well, I'm happy to say, Benjamin, you and I are in agreement. I don't believe that Jesus is God either. So I don't know about you, Richard. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm in agreement entirely as well. It's a refreshing start to a call with a theist when we're all on the same page. I think the majority of self-identifying Christians might disagree with you, and I'm very interested in kind of what your response is to Orthodox Christianity and Orthodox Christians when you talk to them about this subject. How do they react to you, and how do you respond to that?
Well, the response is kind of, they looked at me like I'm crazy. I went over this last week with Talk Heathen, I think it was, or it might have been the Atheist Experience. I explained to him my belief system. I have a really old version of Christianity belief system, like the Gnostics kind of, but different. So I believe in God, but I believe that God isn't all good. I think there's some evil there too. And then I believe in limbo, heaven, and hell.
So do you think the God that you believe in, if you think that he does evil things, he does good things, do you think that God is worthy of worship?
No.
Okay. So there's a... Go ahead.
Yeah, I believe in him. And I was going to say the devil... So I know a lot of people blame the devil for all their problems. And the devil is not really the one doing it. It's God doing it, because even in the Bible, it explains that the devil had reign over all the earth, and that the devil can only do what God allows him to do in the first place. So if the devil causes destruction or does something, God's the one that's allowing it. And then you also get into the problem of, if God is omniscient and he's supposed to know everything, which, I mean, that God being Jesus or whatever kind of goes into that too, because then if he's sacrificing himself to himself, that's just a contradiction.
Well, let me ask you a question there, because I think on our show, we like to dive into understanding why people believe things. So I think we understand kind of what you believe. You believe there's an entity, an agent out there, a thinking agent, I assume, that is a God that can do good things and could do bad things, who is not worthy of worship, but you are still citing the Holy Bible as, I assume, your source material for why you believe these things. Am I understanding you correctly?
So not just the Bible. I've also had personal life experiences. I've died and talked to God. And then I've also had other life experiences. But, I mean, I also quote the Bible, too.
Okay, so do you believe that the Bible's instructions, especially in the gospel, are to be followed?
Well, that's a complicated question, because I know a lot of Christians that would point to Jesus, so-called Jesus's words, and say, oh, well, Jesus said to treat your neighbors as yourselves and treat others the way you want to be treated. That part's good advice. But then when you get into Exodus with the slavery, which I actually called in, I think 2 weeks ago to defend slavery, well, not really slavery, but to defend indentured servitude. And when you get into the Old Testament, that's where all the bad stuff is, like the genocide and, God telling people to murder all their neighbors and everything. And so I try not to pay attention to that.
So what yardstick are you using to determine which parts of the Bible you believe are true and which parts you don't believe? What method are you using?
Well, I believe in most of the Bible. It's just that I try to avoid the bad stuff, because I know a lot of history about the Bible. I know that
I'm gonna stop you for a second. Sorry, Benjamin. Hold on. I know there's a bit of a delay. I want to keep us focused on this question. I think this is the question our callers would be interested in. You said, and I agree with you, the Bible contains instructions to do good things, and it can also contain instructions to do bad things. It's not just limited to the Old Testament, right? The New Testament, slaves, obey your masters as you would Christ. There's some bad advice in there too. But yes, I agree that there's some good stuff of being nice to people and all that. My question was not why you believe that anymore. I understand you believe that. Now my question is, what metric, what method, how do you decide when you're sitting there reading the Bible and you see words on a page telling you that you should do something or should not do something? You're making a judgment as to whether or not those instructions are something that you should follow or not follow. I'm trying to figure out, how do you make that decision? You read those words and it says, own slaves is okay, stone children if they talk back to you, those sorts of things. You're saying, well, that's bad, I shouldn't follow that, but be nice to your neighbor, that's good. How do you make that decision?
Yeah, so I base it on history. I base it on my personal morals. And I also base it on if it's actually good for people or not. So, for example, stoning children that misbehave, that wouldn't be good for the children, and that wouldn't be good for society either today. And I also look at the old days, how it was back then compared to how stuff is now. So
okay, so you're bringing. Sorry, go ahead.
But yeah, so back then it might have been okay to stone children, but now it's not. I want to help you out here. I think what you mean to say is back then people thought it was okay to stone children, but even back then it was wrong to stone children. Do we agree on that? So I believe in subjective morality. But
why is there hesitation there, if I might ask? And I feel now's an appropriate time to jump in. I was going to jump in with a couple of questions about the formulation of the Bible, but I think, Benjamin, that hesitation requires a bit of a prompting as to why there was any hesitation during that question whatsoever before you answered.
Well, no, because I would say it's not moral. So the way that he framed the question was, it was not moral back then, and it's not moral now. But what I said was it was moral to them back then, but from our subjective morality nowadays, it wouldn't be moral. And so that's why I kind of hesitated, because I was like, well, I believe in subjective morality, where I judge stuff based on my own morals instead of going off other stuff. And so that
where does the Bible interact with your morals then? Where is the defining line, Benjamin, if you don't mind me asking, between your morals, the things that you assess in daily life from whichever source you get them from, and what you read in the Bible? Because you obviously take, you take the Bible as a source for some things at least. So where is that defining line where you say too much Bible. I'm going to fall back on this instead to get my moral directives.
Well, I mean, to go back to your example, if the Bible says something like stone your children that are unruly, which, I mean, some people still do that today in different cultures. But I would say that it's not good anyway. I would say that I can read that and be like, it's not a good thing to do that, so I wouldn't do it.
Okay, so you have picked a yardstick that is your own yardstick, so to speak, right? That says, I'm using this yardstick, whatever it is. You mentioned history, you mentioned personal experience and your own judgment to determine what is and is not wrong. And you're saying that you believe in some sort of subjective morality. We can dive into that a little bit, but my interest is more on using your morality today, using your yardstick today. I think what you're saying is you agree that even 2,000 years ago, when they would stone children or, bury children alive under the foundation of buildings to bless those buildings, foundational sacrifices, all of that sort of stuff, you agree that back then it was wrong. Those people who thought it was right were mistaken. Do you at least agree that that's true?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Getting back to God and the Bible, I think, is the next step of to say, why is it that you then believe anything in the Bible is true? What evidence do you have that there is, in fact, a God that you believe in that is both good and bad?
Well, because I go off what I see in the world and also my personal.
So I had a personal experience that I think everybody should have because of a few milligrams, 10 milligrams of a certain substance, some dust in my blood caused me to experience things that to me were very real and I would have sworn to under oath. So no, I can't think that anybody can honestly answer that question because an experience needs to be defined and understood and examined and tested. So no, I don't think anybody's personal experience should convince somebody else. Hold on a second. I don't think any personal experience of one person should convince anybody else of the truth of a claim. I also don't think you should accept your own personal experiences when they are exceptional and might have many other more mundane explanations than the supernatural. They need to be tested. Would you agree with that?
Not completely.
Okay.
I was going to ask you another question before I lose my train of thought. So you mentioned what's real, basically, that your senses can trick you. Right, and so that kind of reminds me, are you familiar with The Matrix?
I'm familiar with The Matrix, yes.
The Matrix.
Yes.
Yeah. So when they was filming The Matrix, Keanu Reeves and the actors that played in The Matrix read a book, and I can't remember the exact name of the book, but the basis of the book was that reality could be what's all interpreted in our minds and the chemical reactions and senses, and that's what makes up our reality, what we see, hear, touch, smell, what we can feel. That's what makes up our reality. And the concept was that essentially you could be a brain in a jar and not tell the difference between that reality and just live. And it also was the expression, I'm trying to think of what it was called now.
You're probably talking about hard solipsism is what you're talking about, the concept that we cannot conclusively prove, that I cannot conclusively prove that I am not a brain in a jar, a brain in a vat. This is where cogito ergo sum comes from. I think, therefore I am. I have to assume this. Otherwise, life is meaningless. So it is one of the four things, at least, that I can think of that I just take on as an axiom that I'm not a brain in a jar, because if I don't believe that, I turn into a babbling, indecisive idiot. But I can check for consistency. I can turn to Richard and say, Richard, are you talking to somebody where the screen says Benjamin and he's asking these questions and you're hearing them? And it seems all consistent. But yes, I admit, hard solipsism will never be solved. I don't know if Richard has a thought on that.
No, I agree. And I think, look, we've got to admit that axioms are a thing, and we all begin from axioms, everyone, regardless of worldview. I think, the cross-examiner touched on an amazing point there, is that we have a reality. We have a reality that we share. And the great thing about this reality that we can share is that we can actually cross-reference it with each other. Now, as far as we can go back and we can go back and we can go back till we get to the very, very axiom. And yeah, all right, that axiom is circular. There's no getting away from it. It's circular. However, given what appears to be the case, it seems to be that this shared reality that we have, this way of assessing the world that we have, is the best that we have in that, within that axiomic framework. Now, we could say, and a lot of people do say when they're trying to play kind of philosophical word games, well, in that case, my worldview where I just assume all this supernatural stuff is just as valid as your worldview, but that's not the case. And here's why the case. Because that axiom that I hold to, that yes, I do exist and there is a shared reality I have with everybody else, which is confirmed by everybody else being there, you hold to too. And the reason I know you hold to it, regardless of what you're trying to say with these philosophical kind of word games, and I'm not talking about you here, Benjamin, I'm talking about the people who put forward these propositions, is that they also act in accordance with the axioms and the worldview that I have. They act as though they are alive. I don't know anyone who I have these philosophical arguments with who forgoes meals and forgoes drinking and forgoes taking part in the world because they truly believe that this isn't a good way of assessing the world around us. No, they act in accordance with it. So regardless of the little word games that people like to play, we all share this. And we know we all share this because we are all living in accordance with this. So yes, this idea of hard solipsism cannot be solved, but that doesn't mean we can just jump to anything to say that it is true. We can still, within that axiomic framework, assess the world around us. And ultimately, it's circular. There is no getting away from that. However, within that framework, we have a very, very good way of doing it. And that very, very good way seems to exclude the supernatural. So when people like yourself, Benjamin, come along who believe in God, it's not enough to say, well, hard solipsism, it could all be an illusion. What we're asking for, as the cross-examiner asked you for earlier, what reasons do you have? What is the justification that you have for believing in this God? And instead of just falling back to, well, it might just all be illusion, we might not all exist, what we're asking for is the actual reasons that you yourself have for believing in this. So if you could kind of expand on those reasons, those particular reasons for us.
Okay, Occam's razor.
Okay, stop there. So you've given us a reason. Why do you think, first of all, give me a brief description of what you consider Occam's razor to be, because some people get this terribly wrong. So I'm just interested in your own definition of Occam's razor to see if we're on the same page.
Okay, so believing in God would save me from eternal torment in hell.
No. Okay, so that's not Occam's razor. I think you've confused your philosophical descriptions.
I'd make
there.
a wager that he has confused it.
Yeah. What you're talking about there, Benjamin, is Pascal's wager, as the cross-examiner has just alluded to. So, let's talk a little bit about Pascal's wager, if that's what you're using. So you're saying that this is what convinces you that God exists, Pascal's wager?
Well, not just that, but I mean, going off the Bible and personal.
Oh, no, let's not say not just that. Let's concentrate on that itself.
Why don't you give us the best one? What's your single biggest reason for believing that God exists?
The Bible. I know that's a loaded one, but I want to say the Bible.
Okay, but let's go with that. What evidence do you have that any supernatural claim in the Bible is true?
Well, going off of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is the Old Testament, and then the tablets and the manuscripts that were found throughout history, aside from the Bible, and then the Bible itself, even though that the Bible has been changed numerous times.
Benjamin, forgive me for interrupting.
Let's ask the question again.
Go on, cross-examiner. You asked.
What evidence do you have that any supernatural claims in the Bible are in fact true? And what I got from you was, well, the Bible and the Dead Sea Scrolls and tablets that have been found and the Bible has been found. I hope you can hear that and realize it's not responsive. I'm asking you for evidence. When a person's asked for evidence, they will say, "Oh, well, this measurement was made and verified by a whole bunch of different people and tested, et cetera, et cetera." Or there were 8 million witnesses who saw this and are alive today, and we can interview them, and they took pictures and things like that. What evidence do you have? Pick the best supernatural claim that you think you can support that's in the Bible. What evidence do you have to prove or to convince people that that supernatural event was real, that it actually happened?
Are you familiar with and I'm trying to think of what it's called, the fish people, the Anami or whatever it was called, the Great Flood. There was a story. It predated the Bible, and there's actually another version of the Garden of Eden too. I was going to get into that too. There's other versions of the.
Hang on, Benjamin, because you were specifically asked what from the Bible it convinces you that there is a supernatural element that
what
God
evidence
exists.
Supports one claim in the Bible. So like you mentioned the Great Flood. Is that what you want to talk about? That the Great Flood, that supernatural event, that there was more water than could possibly exist, et cetera, and happened super fast and there's no evidence of it. Is that the supernatural claim that you believe you have evidence supporting it?
Historical evidence, yeah.
Okay. What evidence do you have that the Great Flood actually happened? And by Great Flood, I want to put us on the same page here because this has been a little slippery. We're talking about the entire earth being covered in water for 40 days and 40 nights, up to the mountaintops, and everything dying except for one human family, correct? And what was on the ark, correct?
Well, the thing that I was going to mention, are you familiar with the flood stories from before the Bible?
Benjamin, please stop. I believe you're referring to the Epic of Gilgamesh, but that's aside. That is an aside because the thing that you stated was that the Bible was evidence for God existing. Now, you have been asked quite clearly and several times now what evidence from the Bible, what there is in the Bible, which lends evidence to the claim that God exists. And what is it about this evidence that convinces you?
You can't use scientific means to prove supernatural because by
nobody asked you to prove scientific means. Neither myself nor the cross-examiner. I've asked you to provide, rigorous scientific evidence. I'm quite happy to accept a philosophical proof from you. That's my background. Religion and philosophy is my background. So I'm quite happy to accept philosophical proof. The thing that we're getting frustrated with is you've been asked, you made the claim that the Bible was evidence. There were things in the Bible which for you were evidence that God exists. And you have been asked several times now what that evidence is, and you keep sidestepping it. Can you see how this is problematic?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, it is. And Benjamin, you're a great guy.
You're the best caller of the week. I mean that. I mean, that's great. As long as you can recognize a flaw in your position, you can go back and try to shore it up. That's what lawyers do all the time is you review what evidence you have and what case you can make. And if somebody points out a flaw, you can then say, okay, I need to go back and research that. So thank you very much for saying, yeah, that is kind of problematic. I think that words mean things, and when people ask them, we're not wasting our time. So when we say, what evidence do you have that any supernatural claim in the Bible is true? It should be a simple answer, because the claims in the Bible are pretty out there. They're pretty extraordinary. And as the saying goes, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I think what's happened here is you have become convinced of an extraordinary claim, at least one, if not multiple extraordinary claims. And you cannot tell us what evidence you can't give us an example of evidence that has convinced you or should convince us, other than vague personal experiences and the Bible and Dead Sea Scrolls and this tale of Gilgamesh. It sounds like you've become convinced of something based on insufficient evidence. And I personally find that problematic, because if you can become convinced of something based on insufficient evidence with respect to the Bible, you can be convinced of something that's not true, or where you don't have evidence in your own personal finances or in your healthcare or in politics. And that's a real problem, because when you believe something based on insufficient evidence, you can hurt yourself and you can hurt people you care about. That's my main concern. What are your thoughts, Richard?
So
yeah, Benjamin,
sorry,
just hang on. I'll just quickly jump in and add to that. Yes, I agree. I agree with the cross-examiner. That is, the reason I personally do this show. I will not speak for every host on here, but the reason I personally do this show is because it is important to me to scaffold people for good reasons for what they believe. It's very, very important, and the reason that is so important for me is exactly the thing that the cross-examiner said. There are people who are taken in all the times by scams, simply because they do not have good reasons for believing what they believe. When you get these email scams from these African countries, from these African princes allegedly asking you for $1 million, they are designed to root out the intelligent people who have good reasons for the things that they believe. This is the way they are actually designed. They don't want people who have good reasoning skills to jump in. I shouldn't have said intelligent people, by the way. I was wrong for that. I actually meant good reasoning skills. They are designed to root out people with good reasoning skills because they don't want them. That's why they are worded in such a basic way. If you send me $100, I will send you $1 million back. They know that people with good reasoning skills aren't going to fall for that. And they're actually done. These scams are done in a tiered way so that the people who respond to them on the first level, they know that they can then, that's it. They know the hook is in. These people do not have good reasoning skills. They are liable to fall for things that, will con them out of money. So this is the way that they're constructed on purpose to get people with poor reasoning. That is why I do this. And that is why it's so important that we do have these conversations and kind of say, and that is why your response a couple of minutes ago, Benjamin, was so good, because you acknowledged, well, actually, you know what? I might not have a good reason for that. So the next step, I think, rather than going down for, asking for more evidence from you, is to say,
jump in and say that's why I asked about evidence and what y'all take as evidence. Because if we get into a discussion and I try to point out the evidence that I have, and none of that evidence is sufficient to y'all, subjective to y'all, then it's not going to do me any good.
So that's a great point, Benjamin.
if it doesn't convince you,
Yeah.
then I can't do nothing with it.
That is an excellent point. You're right. The part of the dialogue between believers and unbelievers needs to be standards of evidence, right? What type of evidence is sufficient in order to support any given claim, right? If you called me and said, hold on a second, if you called me and said, I had a tuna fish sandwich for lunch, I might accept that claim. I know tuna fish sandwiches exist. I've seen them before. I've eaten them before. I know tuna exists. I know how bread's made. I know that people eat things called lunch and all of that sort of stuff. And most importantly, the downside of me falsely accepting or erroneously accepting that if it wasn't true is nothing. Like, it's no skin off my back if you tell me you had a tuna fish sandwich for lunch and when in fact it was peanut butter. No big deal. But if you called me and said, oh, I had a tuna fish sandwich for lunch while I was on a flying saucer, now all of a sudden I'm going to be asking you for evidence, more evidence than the experiences I've had and things like that. I'm going to need something more before I accept that claim. So do you understand that part? I assume you do, that the crazier or wilder or more exceptional a claim is, the more evidence you should demand before accepting it as true. Do you agree with that?
No, I know where you're coming from. I was going to say, just don't buy a tuna fish sandwich from a truck stop. But,
true. And why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you do that? Speaking as somebody who practiced in FDA regulatory law, why wouldn't you do that? You wouldn't do it because we have scientific evidence that poorly kept fish can cause you harm. We have evidence, personal experience, that truck stops may not keep the best food safety practices, etc. But you would not do that because you have this experience, which constitutes evidence, right? And it is sufficient enough for you to be skeptical of. You'd need to see a lot when you went into the truck stops, to see that, oh, they've got refrigerated sections where they've got this, they've got expiration dates and dates that the sandwich was actually made. Maybe you can see the people in the back. You would need evidence before you would be comfortable eating that tuna fish sandwich from the truck stop, because your health is at risk. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So do we agree that a believing in a God is a pretty extraordinary claim, that there is an agent, a thinking agent in the universe that does bad things, does good things, maybe floods the earth, maybe doesn't? That's an extraordinary claim. So we should at least have some extraordinary evidence, some pretty darn good evidence before we accept it as true. Do we believe that? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I do, but at the same time, I'm on the safe side by believing in God. But on the other hand,
which God?
drowning the whole world is
which God?
Okay, Benjamin.
Which God are you playing safe with?
The Hebraic God.
So Yahweh of the Bible, of the Old Testament. Do you believe in the God of the Mormons? Do you believe the God of Orthodox Jews? Do you believe in the pantheon of gods of the Hindus? Do you believe in the religion of the Jains? Do you believe in the 10,000 different religions out there, that some of which have a hell that they would send to you if you don't believe in them? Or do you believe in the God of of Islam?
I believe in a lot of the different gods, but I think that they've been misconstrued over time.
Okay. I think I get where you're coming from. I think, Richard, my opinion here, Benjamin, correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm going to sum up the call, it's, for some reason, it seems like you find comfort or want to believe in gods. You are a good person. You are using your own moral judgment to pick and choose which aspects of different belief systems work for you, and you are lending credence to those because you believe that those are the right thing to do. To me, from the outside, what that looks like is a good person who has developed a moral center using their own life experience, probably the golden rule, those sorts of things, and has looked at these religions, has become afraid of maybe you were raised that way, etc., of hell or punishment. And so to be safe, you are latching on to the good aspects of multiple religions just to quote unquote cover your bases. Am I summarizing that right, Richard? Did I miss anything?
No, I tend to agree. And I'd like to know if Benjamin agrees with your assessment as well.
Well, I wouldn't say torture and hell. I would say just being stuck walking around in darkness and limbo for all eternity. But yeah.
Some sort of punishment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's not uncommon. Do you mind if I ask, were you raised religious?
Yes and no. I mean, in the 80s, I used to go to churches every now and again, and then I went to church throughout the 90s and the 2000s. And then I started going to a church 20 years ago that my neighbor got me into. And then I got kicked out of there, and then I started going to a different church. And the church that I go to now doesn't hold the same beliefs that I hold, but I just go up there to try to help teach them stuff and basically spread knowledge and try to help them.
Understood. So it sounds to me, correct me if I'm wrong, did you have a parent or parents or whoever brought you up? Were they religious? Where did you first hear about God? How did you come to know about a God?
Well, my neighbor actually taught me some stuff. My family wasn't really religious that much. And I've outlived a lot of my family. A lot of my family has died throughout the past decades, and I've outlived most of them. I only have like an uncle and an aunt and my adopted dad, and which actually technically a lot of my family isn't technically related to me, but I've outlived a lot of them. So
I'm sorry to hear that. I will say it was slightly surprising to me to hear that you have this much of a deep-seated concern over punishment from a God and not having been raised religious from a very young age, because that's usually there's a high correlation there. But it does speak to me of the prevalence of that concept in society and in the churching that you've had over the last, as you said, 20 years, that it can really instill that concern. Did you ever have that experience, Richard? I was not religious growing up myself, and I don't have any concerns about punishment.
No, I've not been religious either, and I've grown up in a very multicultural area, and personally had an interest in why people believe what they believe from various religious backgrounds for well over 30 years now. So I've not personally experienced that fear, and I find it intriguing and so interesting when people have, and especially as in Benjamin's case. And Benjamin, this is one of the things I wanted to ask you: why particularly purgatory rather than, for example, the Buddhist hell? Or kind of the eternal hellfire that was sometimes taught about in Orthodox Christianity. Why particularly that? What is it about that scares you?
I've been there. When I died, I was standing over my body, and it was surrounded in darkness. And I could see like the steps of the stadium where I died, but the rest of it was like the lights were off, but I could still see. So I was there, and I could feel, when I was there, I could feel just emptiness. I could feel like abandonment, sadness, just basically emptiness. And I knew that if I would have died, I would have been stuck there. But I survived, came back, and haven't been there since. So that's.
So it sounds like you had some medical emergency. Is that correct? I don't want to get too personal.
Yeah, I died at a stadium. I went to a concert with my neighbor who I went to church with for a long time. And we went to a concert. It was a Pearl Jam concert at the BJCC. And we went up there, and I had a seizure because they had strobe lights and stuff, and I didn't know they was going to have strobe lights. and I had a seizure. My whole body was shaking. I fell down. I could feel my body go numb, and then my hearing went away. And then after that, I was just standing above my body, basically. I had an out-of-body experience, I guess is what it would be.
Okay, so when you say you died, you don't literally mean you died, because obviously I think we'd agree if you actually died and now we're alive again, that would be a miracle and you would be world famous, et cetera. So you had a medical emergency. It felt very different to you and you had this experience. I too had a medical emergency where I had this operation and had an experience where the nurse tried to kill me and steal my stuff. How do we tell which one of us had a legit experience and which one was just brain chemistry doing something odd to our perception?
Well, I guess you just have to go off what you see and believe what you see. But I mean, in that case, I would be believing that I died and was in limbo for about 5 minutes.
Yeah, but you've already admitted through the past conversation when we talked about hard solipsism and evidence that not everything you can see and all your senses can be relied upon. And I gave an example of that where I had a ex post facto explanation. Oh, well, we changed your meds. Let's change them back. And the sensation went away. So if you're in a medical emergency where your brain is going through asphyxia, your chemistry is thrown off, and as I said, it just takes a couple of milligrams of some sort of substance to make your brain believe different things. If you're in a medical emergency, isn't that the time, the least reliable moment where you should trust your perception?
Well, I mean, I believe that I died because I was pronounced dead by the guy that was sitting over me. He said that I died for 15.
Okay, so that person was wrong. That's great. Just by any definition of dead, they're wrong, right? Maybe they said your heart stopped. Maybe they said something else happened. But if they said you're dead, that legally, medically, they were just wrong. So that's not evidence. That's just somebody said, it's evidence of somebody believing that you were dead. Okay. So somebody believed you were dead. Again, you were in a medical emergency. You're still here talking to us. In order for somebody to, in fact, that lends credence, I think, to my sort of thinking. In order for somebody to believe you're dead, you most likely stopped breathing or gave no signs of breathing. Your body's in distress. And I'd like to focus on that because you didn't answer my question. My question was, your body's under the most stress as far as a medical condition or being close to dying that it's ever been in your life, as far as you know, as far as I'm understanding this story. And you had an experience. And you are basing your entire life since then, as far as what you're worried about, devoting all this time that you're giving to the church, possibly your money, who knows, based on that experience, which I think most people would agree is when you are most likely to have deceptive experiences, when you're most likely to have a brain that is not working properly. When people asphyxiate, they start having delusions. Is it not possible that that is what happened to you?
Brain damage too. So
is that not possible? That's what happened to you?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, so between those possibilities, you mentioned Occam's razor earlier. Shouldn't we now use Occam's razor, which is given multiple possible explanations, go with the one with the fewest presumptions? It could be that you had a delusion, you were going through hypoxia or asphyxia or something like that, and you had what a lot of other people report, which is I started having these experiences like a bad dream or a good dream. Isn't that the simplest explanation compared to there is an almighty being that created the universe, and then when you died, you experienced that magical realm? Isn't Occam's razor saying, until I have evidence that this God actually exists, I should probably just assume that I had some unexplainable experience?
What about the thing that says any explanation, once you remove the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth?
So that's from Sherlock Holmes, Arthur and Conan Doyle. In fact, I think Matt Dillahunty called it the Doyle fallacy, that it contains in it a presumption that you know all possibilities. if you look at all the evidence and every other explanation is removed, only the explanation that remains is the explanation. The presumption there is you know what all the explanations are. So that's not true. We can demonstrate that throughout human life, that we have learned new things that give us new explanations. But here, that's not the case. I'm presenting you with two simple explanations. There's a God, or you had a hallucination. Those are the only two. How do you remove either one of those?
Well, so during my time in limbo, whatever it was, I saw somebody sitting over me trying, and I still don't know who this person was, but I brought it up to my neighbors, and I said, yeah, that person was sitting over you trying to get you to come back to life or whatever.
Okay, so not to be rude, but I don't care. I don't care what the experience was. My question was, you have an experience that could be a hallucination, or it could be an experience of the supernatural. How can you tell which it is?
Well, if it was a hallucination, it was a pretty damn good one.
Okay, so I'm going to take that answer as you don't have a way. You don't know of a way to distinguish a good hallucination from the supernatural. If that's the case, I think you need more evidence than I was possibly being starved of oxygen and had an experience, and that convinced me that I should devote 20 years of my life to worshiping a God I've created. But maybe Richard disagrees.
Well, no, it wasn't 20 years. This happened, and I died in 2018. So.
Okay, Benjamin.
Okay, so that's not the reason you believe in God. Thanks for wasting 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
I think we've gone through quite a lot of stuff here, Benjamin. I'm going to let you go. We do have other callers to take. It's been a very interesting call, and for me, it's been a very interesting call because we've kind of walked through several different things, and you've kind of come with us, and you seem to be on the same page as us, even with almost all of those things. But then you kind of default back to this thing of, well, I kind of just believe it anyway. So I want you to kind of, please, if you can, listen back to this episode. You know, it's been quite a long call. Take it in segments, each segment one at a time. Listen to the different subjects we talk about. Listen to the points where you agree with us and you come with us. And then kind of take a note of the points where you kind of go back, you retract, and you go back to the previous thinking you had. You know, and the cross-examiners just raised a couple of them there with you, where you've previously agreed with us, and then you retract yourself and you kind of say, yeah, but I kind of just agree with this anyway. Please just have a listen back to it and have a chew over why you think it is you're doing that. Because for me, that's the most important and most interesting part of this call. It's the way you're kind of assessing things. You seem to have an understanding of what is a good way of assessing things, but you don't seem to be allowing yourself to do that good assessment. You seem to have this emotional, and I don't say that in a negative way because we are all emotional creatures, but you seem to have this emotional response which is overriding that critical thinking aspect of it. And I think it's really, really important for you. But Benjamin, thank you very, very much for your call. It's been an amazing call. Very much appreciate you calling.